So in this segment, we're going to be breaking down a speech Lord Frost gave to some sort of group about the Northern Ireland Protocol, essentially the origins, the issues around it, and also the future of it. So there's a lot to talk about here. I'm going to break this up into essentially 3 videos and then put it together, just in case anyone wants to watch the longer one. I'm probably going to have some sort of breakdown doing this because this is long as hell. But let's go for the first part, which is the origins of the protocol, which we'll talk about in a moment. There's a bit of preamble here because Lord Frost loves the sound of his own voice. Jesus Christ, man. This guy. This will be long, so buckle up. For the first time, Lord Frost will give a personal account of the politics and pressures of the negotiations in 2019 and kind of the issues around the situation. So he says, ladies and gentlemen, the Northern Ireland Protocol is back in discussion because Sinn Féin will probably win the seat of, be the single largest party in Stormont. The government's plans to bring forward legislation covering the protocol in new parliamentary session. That's talking about the bits where they're going to take out parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. I'm going to cover that soon, so subscribe for that. Says, I was the government's Brexit negotiator in 2019 when the protocol was agreed, again in 2020 when it and the UK Internal Market Bill, do you guys remember that, breaking law in a limited and specific way, were part of the backdrop to our trade negotiations, and in 21 I was the responsible minister as the protocol settlement much earlier than expected and in ways we did not predict started to come apart. And the simple fact is it's been debunked by this gentleman here, Dr. Andrew McCormick, who's debunked the British government. So if you haven't watched that video, watch that one. But yeah, there's a lot of preamble here. He goes, first I note the much recent debate about Brexit is really about the pros and cons of the protocol. In a way that is a good thing. It reflects the relative lack of other things to talk about. So essentially saying things are looking okay-ish. Occasionally another issue like fishing or touring performers gets a look in, which Lord Frost failed touring performers. But generally they kind of fizzle out, which is true. Unfortunately, the resulting attention on the protocol is often rather simplistic and plays little regard to the unusual circumstances of its creation. This is a man who's always come out with simplistic and stupid arguments, accusing others of coming up with simplistic arguments. It's funny, isn't it? Second, and with that in mind, it seems that the protocol has become a symbol of different things to different people, which is true. For some in unionism, it's a symbol of betrayal by Her Majesty's government, again, which is true. Nationalists see it, whether they admit it or not, as a step to a border poll and a united Ireland, which is true. Some do see it as that. For Remainers and many in the EU, is a symbol of the UK's supposed failure to understand what was possible and what it had signed up for, which is true that many Remainers and people in the EU for many Remainers and many in the EU, it is a symbol of the UK's supposed failure to understand what's possible. We could have stayed in the single market and customs union and the Northern Ireland Protocol would have not been needed, but again, we didn't. Equally, for some Brexiteers, it symbolises the EU's own carelessness in insisting that on arrangements that prioritise their single market over sustaining the fragile politics in Northern Ireland, which again isn't true. The EU is there to protect a single market, yes, but they have made exceptions for Northern Ireland. It's not a straight block out, essentially, which they could do. They're entitled to do that, but they have made an exception. For other Brexiteers, there is a frustration that we pushed through Parliament a deal which was less than perfect as regards sovereignty and did not absolutely deliver everything that was wanted, because you couldn't deliver everything that was wanted because you promised unicorns and you barely bought a donkey. That's what happened. So overall, what you can tell from this is he's going to argue it's imperfect, but it's the best we could do given the hand we were dealt, and to an extent he's probably right given the goals that they had. He says there is some truth in all these judgments, but more in some others. As a result, discourse about the protocol has become disconnected from reality. That's you, pal. You're the only one disconnected from reality here. He goes, I want to do 3 things. First, recall what actually happened in 2019, how we got the protocol. Second, explain how it started to go wrong. And third, and finally, comment on what needs to happen now. So this is where we'll start the main bit of the video, really. How long have I talked for already? 4 minutes, not bad. So this is the origins of the protocol. This is the beginnings of it. And we're going to break it up into 3 videos and just put them back together. So first then, how did we get this protocol? The negotiations we conducted in autumn 2019 have already disappeared from political memory because, the Tories back then, before the election, had a very, very weak hand. There were a minority government. The DUP were there in coalition. The DUP would never have backed this. And they were made a mockery of, really, the Tories at that point, purely because they couldn't get anything through Parliament. They were desperate and they couldn't do anything, so they went for the only thing they could do, which is lie in a general election. You go step back to the moment that Johnson entered office in 2019 of July. We were faced with a withdrawal agreement that we could not get through Parliament. That was the one where it would keep the entirety of the UK and the EU single market and customs union for goods. And what would happen is that until there was some sort of magical unicorn solution to the border in Ireland, only then could the UK leave. There were lots wrong with it, notably the continued role for the EU's Court of Justice, which still applies to Northern Ireland. But the worst aspect was that the first version of the Northern Ireland Protocol, via the so-called backstop, its effect was to keep all of the UK in the EU customs union and single market until a different way of managing the Northern Ireland border had been found. That's why he's turned the backstop effectively into a front stop. That's what he's done. Even though the EU had said there was no other way, there would be alignment of the whole of the UK to the single market for goods and much else besides, so it'd be dynamic alignment essentially. And yet, despite all this, the concept of an Irish sea border remained in the agreement, but it was as a backstop. It wasn't really, I don't think the Irish sea border was the plan. It was to kind of stop, they were meant to solve the border issue, a hard border issue. There wasn't much about a border in the Irish Sea as far as I'm aware. As Northern Ireland was removed from the UK's customs territory for WTO purposes, and Great Britain and the EU plus Northern Ireland were put back together into a customs union, it was the worst of all worlds. I don't know if he's telling the truth here. I genuinely don't. I'd have to go back and read all of that stuff and have more nightmares. Beyond that, we faced an agreed political declaration which committed the country to a high alignment soft Brexit in the future relationship negotiations that would follow. But to be fair, we still did agree to the political declaration about standards. Even under Boris Johnson, I think we still agreed to that, to have high standards. And the trade and cooperation agreement doesn't allow us to backslide on certain regulations and workers' rights. So again, he's not telling the truth here 100% in my opinion. In considering how to proceed, we face serious dilemmas and many factors that we need to balance. They explain why the final deal was imperfect, and it was always going to be because these people lied to us. First, we had to deal with the growing belief among the political class and the public that the referendum result simply couldn't be delivered because you promised unicorns. You said only a madman would leave the single market. No one is threatening our place in the EU single market. No one's talking about the end of freedom of movement. You guys all told different stories. £350 million to the NHS. You guys all told different stories, that's why. So when the rubber hit the road, there was no way you could deliver because you promised lots of different things. Third, it was clear that a substantial proportion of the political class in all parties wanted to find a way of reversing the referendum result. It's not strictly true. Theresa May was very much desperate to push through Brexit, and I think Jeremy Corbyn was as well. I think he wanted Brexit to happen. Few British governments entering into office had faced such quite a daunting prospect. Probably true. We had to cut through this somehow to get an agreement that we could get through Parliament. So we had to set priorities for the 3 months we had to be ruthless in doing so. And to be fair, we had longer than 3 months, though, didn't we? We could have asked for an extension. These were self-imposed deadlines. Theresa May famously went back to Brussels to get extensions. We decided we had to prioritise first. This is the key here. First, delivering the referendum result and leaving the EU by any means necessary on the set date, which at the time was the 31st of October 2019. Now, we know that didn't happen because we left the EU. Technically, we left, I think, our membership position in the 1st of 2020, January 2020, and then we left the single market and customs union, I think, in 21, hence the border issues. So that's what my memory remembers. But so they actually missed their own deadline in a sense because that stuff wasn't passed until later on. Second, leaving in a way which imposed minimal constraints on the future, a way which did not leave us irrevocably subject to EU laws. So essentially they wanted the end of alignment. So what we're seeing here is they wanted Brexit by hook or by crook. Even if they'd lie, to cheat, they didn't care. They would do it happily. Get out of any kind of dynamic alignment. In other words, we wanted to give the country as much free choice as possible in the free trade agreement negotiations that would follow and make that negotiations as far as possible one between equals. But, the simple fact is we are not equals because the EU is so much more economically powerful than us. That's the difference. It's like going into a trade negotiation with the US. You're not going to win. You are not equals in that sense. That meant for political and legal reasons, our priority had to be renegotiating the backstop, taking the whole country out of the EU's customs union and redoing the political declaration. So essentially, he wanted to go into negotiations without having the kind of idea of dynamic alignment or anything like that. He wanted the UK to be out of all that stuff so we can get more of a Canada-style deal. Because if the backstop was still there, the trade and cooperation agreement probably wouldn't exist, because there would be no way of sorting out the border situation in Ireland. As Martin Howe QC correctly pointed out in his October 2019 article summarising the pros and cons of our deal, it is much more difficult to try and renegotiate an existing text than it would be to get the right result at the more fluid stage of the original negotiation. Which is funny, because they've actually tried to he's saying it's more difficult to try and renegotiate an existing text than it would be to try and get it right the first time round in the original negotiation, except the irony is that is what he has done with the Northern Ireland Protocol. It was agreed in the text, the protocol, the withdrawal agreement, all of this stuff was agreed, and then once it was passed, once Brexit was done, they've tried to renegotiate it. So his point there doesn't make any sense in terms of what happened next. So again, this man, he doesn't make sense. He goes, in doing this, we had to ensure that the new arrangements for Northern Ireland reflected the balance of interests and concerns embodied in the Good Friday Agreement in all three strands. That was our overriding goal in this area, yet you're the only ones threatening the Good Friday Agreement. Strange. We always knew that this would require some special arrangements covering Northern Ireland, which the EU knew as well. Everyone knew this, because of the situation in Northern Ireland. He goes, we never contemplate any sorts of checks or process taking part at the land border, so within the island of Ireland. But we also knew unionist concerns had to be recognised, except you didn't recognise unionist concerns. You just lied to them. And the fundamental unity of the UK single market and customs union territory had to be respected. But you didn't respect it though, because you separated the UK single market and customs territory. Do you guys see what I'm saying? He's not making sense here. He goes, by early September, the Ben Burt, quote, Surrender Act, which was just an effort to stop us leaving without a deal, was in place, the practical effect of which was to make it impossible to leave the EU without some kind of a deal of some kind. We know, given the situation now, how bad Brexit is for our trade. Could you imagine tariffs on top of that? It would be unviable for exports. By removing the walkaway option, this massively weakened our negotiating hand. Let's not forget that the UK scrapped physical checks on EU goods. In a trade war, we'd get stomped because we wouldn't even be able to compete in the trade war. So trade-offs were inevitable, but it was simply not possible to get everything we wanted. And it feels like this is Frost trying to rewrite the past so history remembers him more kindly. I don't think history will remember him kindly. He says, we put forward the proposals we did in early October. The proposal was that to minimise friction at the land border and give pre-existing arrangements, we were ready to agree Northern Ireland would have to align with EU SPS and EU manufactured goods rules. We recognise these agreements would entail some process in the Irish Sea, but we believe that most of them could be done behind the border. So it doesn't really make much sense unless you're going to do most of them like in GB. That sentence doesn't make sense. We were not, however, prepared to put Northern Ireland into a different custom zone to that of the rest of the UK, but effectively he did. Northern Ireland is in the EU's customs union, it's not in ours. So, he's saying we weren't prepared to do this, but he did it. He goes, the crucial new element was consent. We believe the only way it could be acceptable for any part of the UK to be subject to EU legislation and institutions without a say was if there was a periodic consent by the Northern Ireland people through their democratic institutions. Stormont, there'll be a consent vote in 24 on it, but then you've got the government talking about they might override the consent vote because they're not happy with the fact that Sinn Féin might be the biggest party there. But I think this is more talk from the government, which love to bluster. He goes, this offer was supported by virtually all Conservatives. The DUP described it as a serious and sensible way forward, probably because the DUP never anticipated that they would be the ones to be voted out in Stormont. I think what they thought could happen is if this thing goes south in 24, they can just vote against the Northern Ireland Protocol and get rid of it. In the 15 days that followed, it became clear that the EU would look to Ireland to judge whether the consent arrangements were agreeable, and Ireland would look to the EU to judge the rest, which makes sense given that Ireland would have to deal with any kind of fallout from this. They would be the main victims of it, so that makes sense. He says, we unlocked the consent arrangements at Wirral meeting with Varadkar on the 10th of October. It was clear Ireland wanted to see a deal. Unfortunately, I think ceding to EU pressure, Ireland would not agree to a consent vote in Northern Ireland to go into the proposed arrangements, yet Ireland did agree to it because there is a consent mechanism in there. So it doesn't make sense. He tried to argue that the EU pressured Ireland into accepting the consent agreement, but then Ireland could have rejected it if they wanted to. Again, it doesn't make sense. But of course, the EU is always the villain here. Because the problems came in Brussels, it was clear that the Commission doubted we had the political backing to get a deal through, which makes sense given that Theresa May failed so many times. On the 17th of October, the last day which allowed time to complete parliamentary process, in my opinion, they were hoping that political developments would see Brexit reversed, particularly after the Supreme Court's prorogation ruling, which, is fair enough. If the EU wanted Brexit reversed, that's fine. I've got no issue with them wanting that, but they didn't drag this out. It was on us. We're the ones who couldn't get through stuff through our own parliament, not the EU. It was as a result they turned the screws. Talks happened when and in the EU, in the configuration the EU wanted, because you're negotiating with the bigger power. That's why, because we're a member of them. It would be on their terms. My negotiating team was treated brutally as the supplicant representatives of a renegade province. I mean, again, it's just a joke what he's saying here. He goes, culminating us being shut in the meeting room in Berlaymont until 2 a.m. Like, you're telling me they told you couldn't leave. I wouldn't be surprised if they thought you were going to leak stuff to the media, but like, come on, dude. You're telling me they said, no, you can't leave until a certain time. Like, get out of here. On the final night of the talks, while the Commission debated whether they wanted to sign off on the deal, we put up with it because we wanted to get this done. The brave patriot, Lord Frost, waited in a hotel until 2 a.m. with his team in order to get this done, because he's a patriot. He goes, substantively, the EU insisted on application of the EU's customs rules, with the only redeeming feature the provisions that there should be no tariffs on goods at risk of going into the Republic of Ireland, the details of which were to be worked out later. And if Frost was so concerned about this, he would have worked out the details now. That was a key problem, because that's why they keep moaning about stuff. But the details should have been hammered out early on during negotiations. Because although we were able to agree some important language, notably to agree Northern Ireland's status in the UK's customs territory, a crucial difference from the backstop, we could do nothing in these circumstances about the EU's insistence that EU customs rules should nonetheless apply, because goods can go freely between NI to any EU member state. So it would make sense that they would be in the EU's custom rules territory. That makes sense. Otherwise, you'd allow lower standard goods right into your single market. Because this was the straw that broke the DUP's back. They withdrew their support and we faced a very difficult decision, not least because we, as it turned out correctly, had also huge doubts about the workability and political implications of the customs agreements. We faced a choice: take this deal, try and get it through Parliament, sort out the details in 2020 while we were negotiating the trade agreement, and it bears repeating that no one knew we'd actually get the trade and cooperation agreement. Or walk away, fail to deliver Brexit on the 31st of October, and most likely see the government collapse, which probably would have happened. I think if they failed to get this through, the Tories were a minority government with no coalition at this point. I think that would have been it for Johnson, but, that's not what happened. At that point, we would have seen, at best, a second referendum, quite possibly, Brexit taken off the agenda for good, and who knows what the consequences are of domestic policy. But, Johnson effectively got the Northern Ireland Protocol, he got the withdrawal agreement from the EU, and the opposition parties allowed him to have an election on it. And, I blame the Lib Dem leader at the time, the lady, I can't remember her name. I blame the SNP and I blame Labour for that. They should have got together, never allowed a general election to happen. But they were naive. Because we decided the lesser risk was to push the deal through and trust that we could sort the detail out with the EU later, even though you agreed with the gentleman in 2019 that the best thing to do is sort out the details whilst the negotiations are ongoing, rather than after they're done and already agreed upon and voted in. Like, he doesn't make sense, man. Because as it turned out, we had to go through the election to deliver it, but deliver it we did, and Brexit happened, which is true, because as Frost said earlier, regardless of what happened, he wanted to get Brexit done, and boy did he. Because my conclusion is that this protocol was the only realistic detail available given our unsatisfactory starting point in 2019. Was it a rough starting point? Yes. Did it have to pan out like this? No. I do not believe Brexit would have happened if we had not taken it, and therefore it is overwhelmingly likely it would still be part of the EU now, which is probably true. The consequences of that, both for our political system and for any influence we had in the EU afterwards, would have been highly damaging. I don't think it would have damaged our position in the EU that much, but I think for our political system it would have been very damaging, given how important these people made Brexit to be. Because I hear people say that we could have reopened the deal after winning the election. Frankly, I think they are kidding themselves. We won the election with an oven-ready deal that got Brexit done, yet these people keep talking about unfinished business. But it's true, there's no way the EU would have reopened negotiations at that point. It was, you got what you wanted, bye. Because that's how negotiations work. You can't go back. It'd be stupid. Because my personal view at this point is that the deal would probably last until the first consent vote in 24. But I think right now, I think that might not be the case. Because that's what they gambled on. You know, worst case scenario, it'd be here for about 4 years. But that's not what happened. Because I expected that we would do so much domestic reform and change within Great Britain between 2020 and 2024 that it would be self-evidently attractive to Northern Ireland to end the protocol and put some arrangements in place. But the problem is, the Stormont elections are happening now, and I don't know how long the elections last for, or like how their term lasts for, but I'm assuming it's about probably like 4 or 5 years, so that's not going to happen now. Because I also thought that once we left, the atmosphere between us and the EU would change. It's become much less fraught and tense, as we put the bad days behind us. But you know, you're the one who made the bad days worse, my friend. You're the one with the unilateral actions, and your constant sabre rattling has made it much, much worse. And therefore we would be able to find ways of implementing the protocol in practice, which kept it workable and ensured it would remain compatible with the Belfast Agreement. So let's really think about this, because I think someone called Mustafa Rahman, he sums up a lot better, which is senior officials have found Frost's intervention this week surprisingly honest. He negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol to get Brexit done and stay in power. Now he wants rid of it to win an election and stay in power. I don't think the Northern Ireland Protocol will define whether they win or lose their next election. I think they've got a lot of other things to deal with. Nothing to do with unionism, economics, global Britain, just Tories' pursuit of power, which is true. And this is a decent summary of it, but I just agree with this bit here. But the simple fact is that the only reason the Northern Ireland Protocol came about was because the Tories needed something to run with. They needed something to say, okay, look, we got an agreement with the EU, we can get this through, everything will be fine, we can finally get Brexit done, it's oven ready, once you vote us in, it's done. That's it, that's what they needed, because Labour were talking about, I think, a second referendum at the time. That was Keir Starmer's policy he pushed for, and I think that was also the members' policy as well. That's what the members wanted. The Lib Dems were, kind of irrelevant, sort of, and the SNP don't have a large party, but I think they also would have wanted a second referendum. So, given that, the Tories wanted something that we can say, once you vote us in, it's done. No more faffing around, no more second referendum, it's finished. Even though the irony is the Tories and the Telegraph keep talking about unfinished business. Ironic. But anyways, I'm going to wrap this one up here. How long have we been going for? Probably ages. About 23 minutes. But, I think this is a good enough summary of Frost's interpretation of the origins of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that they were given a bum hand, essentially. They did their best with what they had, and their idea was just get this thing through and renegotiate some parts of it later on, essentially. That's what it seemed to be their idea, and especially given that, there was a gentleman he cited which said that it's better to get things done in the negotiations before the text is formed, voted upon and implemented, because it's much harder to change things then. But if he demanded things like the command paper back in 2019, the EU would have told him to get lost. So yeah, I don't know what more to say on this one, but it's been a long old video. Hopefully someone watches it to the end. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. There's 2 more bits of this, which is the why the protocol isn't working, should we say, the current situation, and then what Frost believes is the future of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which should be fun to cover. Let me know what you think in the comments, everyone, and hopefully I'll catch you next time.